Right.
So one of the features or one of the characteristics of I see from the Tea Party, and this is judging from signs. I don't know that many Tea Party people, but there seemed to be a theme there of smaller government. Would you say that that's one of the things in where let's get rid of the nanny state? I see a lot of complaints about, you know, I bought this, I paid for this, and you pass it on to my kids, you know, and all this type of stuff. Would you agree with that? Is smaller government is basically one thing they're looking for?
From a Tea Party perspective, one of the primary things that you hear is there's 17 enumerated powers in the Constitution. Let's get government to handle the 17 enumerated powers. Limit the government. We always heard government was limited, and we started to see government as being an unlimited entity. So reduce the size of government to the enumerated powers that have been identified from day one. It seemed to work for 135 to 150 to 175 years, and then all of a sudden we have just gone back to where government is going to be the be-all, get-all.
Well,
to the end of, to everybody.
Or where government becomes a tool to get money for you.
To use government. It's become, why do we have so many people on K Street? Bottom line is the
K Street is
basically your all the boys that are up there and their Armanis in Washington D.C. that got the Brooks Brothers suits, the Armanis that deal for special interest. Their salaries on special interest. It's cheaper to go into the halls of Congress, get them to write a law in order for that law to take from the greatest number of people in the nation and focus the funds into a very small benefit, pot that benefits a very small segment of the pocket.
And there, by the way, there's three groups I can think of. You might think of some more, but one of them, of course, is the corporates.
Yeah, sure. Corporates, bankers.
They're trying to get big money. Another is the unions. They push for a lot of money. Mm-hmm. And another is what you might call the poor people. They're looking for handouts.
Well, but the poor people, I don't think, are represented to the point. I mean, look at the Greens. If you go to the Greens are a very active, group. And instead of selling, those are special interests. You look at the corporates. Corporates, I mean, you go
They
back,
got the money to really bring on
the problem when you've got the kids on Occupy Wall Street saying that the problem is the Wall Street's got all the money and the corporates got all the money to be able to get government to mandate more funds flow through them. The kids are right. I think they should concentrate their efforts in Washington D.C. more so than I do in on Wall Street. But it's what we've got when it gets to where government thinks their job is to basically get 51%, one more than half, to be able to mandate to one less than half what they're going to give to the majority. This nation was not founded. It was on inalienable rights. It was not on being able to get one more than half to be able to take everything one less than half has, and that's the way I grew up. I mean, you start digging ditches at 13. You work all your life. You provide for yourself, and that's what I thought everybody was doing. And I come to the realization that I was kind of a fool because government is basically getting an intermediary, taking my labor and transporting it around to whoever's going to vote for them and whoever's going to fund their campaigns. And I think that is the frustration that a lot of Tea Party individuals have.
I agree with you on that, and that's one of the things we're looking at as smaller government. Now, you brought up the Constitution. Do you find there's a trend of Tea Partiers to say, hey, let's support the Constitution more. Let's get back to constitutional principles. Sure. Is it that specific? You see that?
What I see in the Tea Party is a lot of folks that were not educated in the history of this nation that have taken it upon themselves to educate themselves on the history of the nation, which goes from the Declaration to the Articles of Confederation to the Constitution, up through the Northwest Treaty, after, all the way through all this thing. And once you start reading the history and looking at the transitions of where we started to where we are, you start getting very frustrated. Special interests were involved in this government from day one. But it's just gotten more and more and more pronounced and bigger and bigger and bigger. Right. when the states were doing their jobs, basically shielding the populace within that state
That was the
from the
original
federal
intent, right,
government
right.
under the original concept, then the federal government was limited to their primary functions of
Foreign
security,
affairs, yeah, right.
basically foreign security. They had to mint, they were doing some of the things. But as soon as we went to 1913, as soon as we hit the fractional reserves, or as soon as we hit the Fed printing dollars, the Fed's being able to use freshly scripted, fresh scripts to buy off the states got used to that infusion of cash flow and basically accepted anything to be able to let the Feds tell them what to do so they continue to get the cash.
The bottom line is we've become a nanny state. You know, through the Federal Reserve, whatever it is. That's right.
And if all edicts are going to be coming out of Washington, D.C., then heck, let's get rid of the states.
So the idea of back to the Constitution, because I see it on signs, and I'm not quite sure how, like you point out, how in-depth the knowledge is of the Constitution, but there is a certain amount of knowledge that this can't be it. You know,
that's it.
What we're seeing here cannot be the way the Constitution is supposed to work, and you know, and I know from the studies of the Constitution, that's absolutely not the way it's supposed to work. So there is this tend to get back to it, what they're counting on being more freedom, less government, and more individual responsibility is the idea of it.
And I believe folks being self-educated and taking the effort. I mean, I'm reading right now pieces of aid to some monetary history of the United States, going back to England when we were colonies of England. And as you dig into these things, people are starting to understand this is not the way it's supposed to work. And then you see this NDAA come out of Washington, D.C., this National Defense Authorization Act.
And that allows for
which talks about, basically they can retain you without, suspend habeas corpus. You don't have to have a trial. Basically, they can lock you up, throw away the key, and say it's legal.
But they have to be alleged that you're a terrorist.
Somebody
has to say that. Now, that's where it gets really fun. You have to say you're a terrorist. Nobody has to prove it. You don't get a trial over that. You don't get a trial over it. Somebody says, that guy's a terrorist. So now it says, throw away the key, go get him, throw away the key.
And you start watching what they're doing from an authoritative standpoint, from a totalitarian, authoritative standpoint at the upper levels of government, as they start to understand that people are finally realizing that what they're doing, they don't have the authority to do. They have the guns, but they don't have the authority.
Not by the Constitution.
Not from a constitutional
from their own authority.
Right, exactly.
I mean, we got guns. Here's our authority.
And that's part of the problem. And you're looking at so a lot of your police forces becoming more militarized. I mean, if you look at the big picture, and you sit back and you say, this is not what I understood America to be. I mean, I'm 50, what am I now? 53. I won't be 53 here for too long. I know I look older. I've had a rough time of it, George. But anyway, you just remember back what it was always. We live in the freest country. You basically produce more than you consume, and you get along with your neighbors. You don't steal. You don't kill. You follow Ten Commandments. I mean, I'm not a super religious individual, but that was pretty much the way it is. You follow the Ten Commandments, and you get along in society. And I've pretty much practiced that my entire life.
And I think that concept that you're describing there, leaving out the religious part, but basically the concept there is what people conceive as a constitutional government type of setup.
Exactly. It's where it goes back to common law, and you do what you're expected.
But it's individual self-sufficiency. It's not like we want the government to do it for us.
It's not this collective.
There's one other one I see a lot, and I think you've mentioned it before, and that is there seem to be a lot of signs about balancing the budget, spending too much money. What are we doing to our kids? You see pictures of little kids with
I'm
here I am.
56,000 in debt. Yeah, and he's in his stroller. Exactly. Right.
So that's another. So we have this concept of balance the budget seems to be. Quit spending what you don't have seems to be a theme of the people that are out there on those streets at the Tea Party.
Balancing the budget is two separate things: debt and balancing the budget. Basically, the balanced budget is an annualized. You don't spend more than you take in.
Right.
But the problem is the government's already spent so much beyond what they've taken in and made so many promises beyond what they're going to be able to take in the future. So, I mean, we have a debt crisis. We have been very benefited from the simple fact, going back to Bretton Woods in the 40s, after the Second World War, going back, and the dollar being the world reserve currency. That allows us to print dollars. Well, those dollars have got to get thrown on somebody's debit account. They've been thrown on the futurities. Is that the right word? Onto the future. Posterity, after whatever the word is. That's posterity.
Kids,
but basically, it's gotten thrown onto my kids and my great-great-grandkids that are not born yet. And once you start realizing it, you either got to say, I accept it, or I'm not going to accept it. And I think a lot of the Tea Partiers, if you look at the Tea Party, it says, we can't accept this. It's not fair. And you go back and read Thomas Paine's Common Sense. One of the early things is throwing debt onto the future is an immoral act. And I totally agree with that. I mean,
that was used to consider very immoral.
Very immoral.
Right.
Jefferson,
I mean, debtor's prison.
Sure, that was debtor's prison and everything else. But that was on the individual basis if you couldn't pay the debts. But to make it a generational issue, we have done to future generations that these kids cannot be productive enough to stand up and make it good. And they should, in my mind, they shouldn't have to. And we need to start talking about that at the political level, because that is one subject that no politician wants to talk about.
That's right.
Get honest, folks. You know, it's time for a little honesty at the political level of all levels of government. And I think the primary problem is in that little 10 square mile plot in Washington, D.C.
Okay. All right, we'll take a break here and come back with a little more in just a minute.